Okay, so I'm beginning the recording now so that folks that sign up for the rally over the next few weeks will be able to come back and take a look at some of these. Rick and I were talking about last week's discussion, and I got quite a few comments from folks during the week, and we thought it would be useful, if it would be useful to you, to do 2 more meetings. I think we'll take a skip a week and then to another one, and then see where we are from there. And the point being, we want to be available to you. And I know that for many of you, this will be a big one, big trip. And I can still remember my first time, or maybe even second time doing this. And it's a major thing getting ready. We want everyone to feel that they're getting adequate support from all of us here at Salty Dawg Sailing Association. So as we get a little further along, what we may decide to do is to assign you to a mentor who has equal or greater experience than the folks we're talking to you right now. And we'll make sure that everybody has support up until the very end. And then, of course, in Hampton, we'll be available. There'll be lots of people there that know what they're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick to get started on the agenda. And again, thank you for everyone for being here.
So one of the questions that we had, and I'll talk for probably about 5 or 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and then we'll open it for some questions. But at the same time, if you have questions while I'm going through this, don't hesitate to either raise your hand or you can put it in chat. Whatever is comfortable for you. I'm certainly open to answering questions. We've had a lot of questions about weather, and I would strongly suggest that if you have not had a chance, we have a weather webinar that's up in the webinars, and I think that would be really worth looking at so that you get some idea of what's going on. If you're not subscribed to the Weather Service, I probably would go ahead and subscribe to it, because it will give you a chance to look at what weather is doing in the United States, particularly west of the Atlantic, and you begin to see how, as the summer goes along, and the season changes here and up here in Maine, we've got another month of summer left, and then it becomes fall in a big hurry in September. But you'll be able to get a chance to look at what the weather's doing and how weather is going to affect you. The common events that occur as we get ready to leave is getting set up, and Chris will do a weather forecast each evening, starting probably 3 days before, maybe 4 days before you get ready to leave, so that everybody is up to speed on how the weather is moving across the country and what Chris sees. So, would somebody mute their microphone? We got a lot of background noise coming in. There we go. One of the things that always happens is a week and a half out, the weather looks like it's going to be the most spectacular trip that's ever happened in the world of rallying, and we're going to have 15 or 20 knots all the way down to the Caribbean, from probably the Northeast from the time you leave, and you'll run all the way down on the same tack, and everything will be just super. And about 2 days before we get ready to leave, life will change in a hurry. Our goal is to get everybody across the Gulf Stream, and I want to make sure that the bigger, faster boats understand that we may set this up to leave on a different day. We may be a day late, and historically, about 50% of the time, the rally is held up for a day or two, waiting for a weather system to go through. The idea is to get everybody across the Gulf Stream in reasonably good conditions. Now that means somebody that has a 35-foot boat or a 40-foot boat and is a little bit slow may need to leave the night before, may need to leave very early in the morning to get going. And this is a time when, if you're sailing slowly, it's a good time to spend some diesel fuel so that you can get across the Gulf Stream. Once that event is over with, That's really the thing that's got everybody nervous when you leave. So once that event is over with, then you can slow down and sail down to the Caribbean or down to the Bahamas at your speed and the way you want to go, the speed that you want to go at, and understanding that you will have a weather event probably 3 or 4 days later, a weather event being a front coming across and overrunning you. These fronts come across the United States. Let me back up a little bit. Lows start down in Texas, and they tend to come northeast up through the United States, through the Ohio Valley. And, you know, you hear it here. There's a low in a low in the Ohio Valley with a trailing cold front that runs back to Georgia. Well, as that low moves up and moves northeast, that trailing cold front comes off the United States. And as it goes across the Gulf Stream, can intensify to some extent. So we'll get the boats out after a system goes through, and your goal is to get across the Gulf Stream before the next system comes along. Now, the Gulf Stream is close. It's usually within 100 miles or so of us leaving, and it's about 70 miles wide at the point that you're going to cross it off Cape Hatteras. So it's not terribly wide. If you hit that in the morning and you're doing 5 knots, you know, you're going to be through it by the afternoon, and you'll know that you're through it. You'll know that you're coming out on the other side of it, because the water will cool down again. From there on, these fronts move at about 25 to 30 miles an hour. So you can expect a front to come up behind you. And the intensity of that front will be forecast by Chris. If it's a relatively mild front, you know, it's not a big deal. You may have winds going from the south to the southeast to the southwest. And then as the front passes you, they'll go to the northwest, and come around to the northeast. And it would be reasonable to expect that you would sail in 25 to 35 knots of wind for a while as that front passes you. So you need to be ready to do that. Reef early, get yourself set up. Occasionally, these fronts get to be a little more sporty, and you want to really think about what you're going to do and how are you going to handle the boat, and get your team together so that you can organize people and change watches, and maybe put some sandwiches together and get a thermos bottle with some hot coffee in it, or some tea, or maybe some soup in it. Because if you have a sporty day or two, nobody wants to be down below cooking, or at least most people don't want to be down below cooking on their first passage. Once you get through that second front, it is very likely that you will reach into the trade winds before another front comes through. And at this time in the year, leaving from Hampton, most of the fronts are not running down into the Caribbean as they will in January, where you get a change in the weather all the way down into the Mona Passage or the Windward Passage. So once you get through that and you get on to sailing in trade winds, from that point on, it's a pretty stable sail. And you may have 25 knots of wind, but that's what it's going to be. And the waves will be further apart. You won't have to worry about thunderstorms. You won't have to worry about the front overrunning you again. It would be very odd to see that happening. It has happened, but it's odd. Another thing that you might want to look out for, and Chris will forecast, is a trough coming through south of you in the Caribbean already. If that happens, the wind will turn southeast and you'll be beating down towards the Caribbean. Not the most fun experience everybody has, but occasionally this happens as well. And you should be prepared for that, particularly emotionally or mentally prepared for that, and prepare your team for that, so that you may want to turn and reach northeast a little bit until the front goes through, until the trough goes through and the wind switches back around to the northeast. Several years ago, we had quite a number of boats that left on a good forecast, but with the idea that there was going to be a trough coming through in front of them. And they had up to 40 knots of wind out of the southeast. And lots of them turned around and they were actually sailing back northeast for a day and a half until the front went past. And then they could turn and get back into trade winds again, and the rest of the passage was pretty decent. So that's my 10-minute speech on what you guys should be prepared for doing this trip. Have we got questions? If we don't have any questions, I'll talk for another.
No, I wanted to add something to what Rick has talked about. The operative point about the strong southeast winds or a trough, and I've certainly had plenty of experience in dealing with those. And a trough is, think of it as kind of a front that runs diagonally often from the Bahamas up towards Bermuda. On one side of the trough, the wind blowing in one direction. On the other side of the trough is blowing 180 degrees to the different direction. But the point is, if you're going to be facing 35 knots of wind, just don't go that way. And Rick commented on that. They say that gentlemen don't go to weather, and in cruising, that is probably prudent because it's just like anything else. If you wait a couple of days, it'll often look very different. So in one example, I've run into very light southeast winds many times, and it's just irritating because you just can't go towards your destination. So instead, one time in my worst example, we sailed due east for 3 days, and it was comfortable, fine. And then finally the wind went in the right direction, and we turned and we sailed directly towards Antigua. More often than not, we don't hit the trades. At least in the last couple of years, we haven't hit the trades until 500 miles from Antigua. So it tends to be a little bit of a cat and mouse with these changes in wind direction and so forth. It can be very frustrating, but there's no reason to get beat up. Sometimes it's inevitable, but more often than not, just by heading off to the northeast or whatever. And Chris will give you several days of warning, saying he recommends, in order to avoid unpleasant sailing, to point maybe even away from your destination for a while. For that reason, sometimes people will bail into Bermuda and stay there for a couple of days and wait, because Bermuda is east northeast of the Cape Hatteras. So I still remember the first time Rick gave a talk about getting ready for crappy weather, and I was in Hampton, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm not ready for this. But you do have to be prepared, but more often than not, it's not as bad as you might fear, but you do have to assume that it could be that way.
So if we have no other questions about that, let's talk about the Gulf Stream for a minute, because I know that from doing this for a long time and teaching for a long time and doing a lecture series at Hampton, I know that everybody gets wound up about the Gulf Stream. There's a couple of things to remember, and that is that every single boat that has ever left the east coast of the United States and gone either to Bermuda, the Bahamas, the Caribbean, or Europe has crossed the Gulf Stream. So there's a lot of guys have been out there and done this already. This is not a new thing. And the Gulf Stream is actually much less, as long as you're prepared for it and you follow Chris's direction. The Gulf Stream is really a non-event. You'll get into it, it'll get a little bit rougher, the water will get considerably warmer. You might be able to catch some really neat fish out there if it's not rough. You'll be through it in a few hours, and you can tell you're through it because you lose the current and the water cools off again. So the whole deal with going through the Gulf Stream is to try to go through it, across it. If you're going to, and not turn and steer down into it. What you need to let the boat do is take the coordinate that Chris gives you and get the boat going, keep going in that direction, and let the boat be carried by the Gulf Stream to the northeast. That's the way the Gulf Stream is running, where we're going to cross it. And you will find that you're carried maybe 25 miles by the time you get across the Gulf Stream, maybe 30 miles to the northeast, and come out of it and keep going. Those people that turn down into it to try to come out at the same latitude that they went in find themselves fighting the Gulf Stream all of the way across. You're turning down into the current, you're slowing yourself down, and you're leaving yourself in the Gulf Stream longer than you need to be. And it would be nice to go across, get it over with, and get out of it. The Gulf Stream has its own little weather system because the water is so warm. Convection starts up more quickly. If there's anything going on, the Gulf Stream will exacerbate it. You might come into the Gulf Stream in 10 or 15 knots of wind and find out the Gulf Stream has got wind from the same direction, but now at 25 knots, not a whole lot more. The key issues are not crossing the Gulf Stream in a northeast wind, even when the wind is up to 20 knots in the Gulf Stream from the northeast, the Gulf Stream can get pretty uncomfortable. If you try to cross it in 30 or 40 knots, it's a miserable existence, and you just don't want to do it. So what would you do if you run up to it and you're late and the Gulf Stream is rough? Well, that's a good place to heave to and wait on this side of the Gulf Stream. If you're coming back from the Caribbean, where you have much less control of when you get to the Gulf Stream because you're traveling 11 or 1,200 miles before you get there, and you come up to the Gulf Stream and the Gulf Stream is active and you've got wind out of the northeast, heave to for a day or so. Hank George, who was the president of the organization for quite a while and a very good friend of mine, has on a number of occasions come up out of the Caribbean and hove to for a day or so. The boat moves along a little bit, it's up and down a little bit. You read some books, make some cake or cookies, have a nice couple of days. When the Gulf Stream settles down, you let the jib go and you move across the Gulf Stream in controlled conditions. Every year you read about boats that get in trouble in the Gulf Stream, and there's no reason for any of us who are sailing the boats that we're sailing and on a time frame that we're on, which is hopefully not much of a time frame, to go across the Gulf Stream in rough weather. It really doesn't pay. You can go across the Gulf Stream in a northerly wind because it's blowing across the Gulf Stream where we're going to cross it. You can go across it in a southeast wind, a southwest wind, a northwest wind, a north wind. But when the wind goes to the northeast, it really is difficult. Now, the first Caribbean 1500 that I did back in 1990, or that Julie and I did back in 1990, we had some pretty rough weather in the Gulf Stream. We had a 40-knot gale in the Gulf Stream, and it was blowing out. Fortunately, it was blowing out of the north. The waves were huge, and it was the first time I had ever had a wave break into my boat, break into the cockpit. So, we probably shouldn't have been in there. We probably should have waited another day before the fleet left, but we all got through it fine. There was no damage to any of the boats. Everybody got through it okay. But think about it. And if you are uncomfortable with the weather forecast, or if you are uncomfortable with being able to reach the Gulf Stream in the time that Chris has outlined, there is no shame. As a matter of fact, I've done it a whole lot. I've waited a week and left a week later than everybody else, or a week later than most of the fleet, because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to put the boat into the Gulf Stream, or I was tired, or my crew was tired. Maybe the crew didn't feel very well. Maybe I didn't feel well. I had a cold or something. Nothing wrong with stopping and waiting and taking the next weather window. The islands, I know I said it last week, the islands will be there when you get there. They've been there for quite a while. There's no need to rush across the Gulf Stream and put yourself under a lot of pressure to get across. I'll end there. We can take some questions later on, and I'll turn it over to Bob for provisioning.
There's two schools of thought for provisioning. I think the basic truth in all cases is you need to assume you're going to be out longer than you think you are. If you figure it'll be Caribbean is going to be anywhere from 8 days to 2 weeks. That's a big spread, depending upon the boat speed and the conditions. As I mentioned, if you're pointing in the wrong direction for several days, then you got to add that to it. And you don't want to let people go hungry, obviously. Some people basically provision every meal for a week. And they pre-cook them and then they bake them and so forth and so on, or do them on the stove. I take a different approach. I bring along a sort of pre-made meals for the first couple of days, because I find it takes a while for me in particular, and certainly the crew, to settle in. They don't know the boat. I just don't. It takes a while. When I'm looking at the charts and I see 1,450 miles to go, I'm like, ugh, that's a long way. But after a couple of days and we're making miles, it somehow seems a lot less daunting. In the middle of the trip, it just becomes a bit of a blur. So I try to make it as easy as I can. One of the basic truths in eating on a boat is everything tastes better on a boat. And as I used to say to my boys, if it doesn't taste good, you're probably not hungry enough. But somehow I find even the most basic food on a boat tastes pretty good. And so things like pasta are always great. You get cans of pasta, or rather cans of sauce. If you want to provision ahead of time, meatballs or pre-cooked chicken or something like that, or chicken in a pan, easy stuff. I have fairly limited freezer space because I like to bring stuff to eat once we get down there. And so to jam it up with things just for the passage, I generally don't do that. But I find that, for example, some of the heartier soups, like the big cans with the meatballs and so forth, what I'll do is I'll take 2 cans of that, pour it into a pot, and then put a whole bunch of meatballs in, and frozen meatballs, because they don't take up a whole lot of room and they make it much heartier. Having sometimes when it's really unpleasant, having just the ability to heat up some ramen noodles is a good thing to do. They have a light, somewhat salty, just don't need to put all the salt in. But the fresh vegetables and so forth are only going to last you for a limited amount of time, certainly not the whole trip. There's little tips you can get from out of cruising magazines, and I'll just use one example. If you wrap celery in aluminum foil, it keeps for a lot longer than it would otherwise. I don't know why that is, but it just does. One of the things that Julie, Rick's wife, taught me was that wraps never get moldy. I mean, it's unbelievable how long they'll last in a refrigerator, and they're thin and they take up very little room. So I bring a lot of those. I also use eggs quite a bit. Eggs, you can make egg salad or egg sandwiches. Somehow in the morning, an egg wrap with a tortilla and maybe a little salsa. People love that stuff. It's some of the most, I'd say we tend to be maybe more inclined to what I would call comfort food. We don't get too fancy, although once we're in the Caribbean, we tend to cook fairly elaborately. But just the ability to dress it up with a little bit of herbs, not too spicy, but just herbs and so forth, really is very, very appealing. Rick, you want to add to that?
Sure. Let me back up a little bit and talk about provisioning. I can tell you that when Julie and I took off and went around the world, we had cans and cans and cans. The boat that we had a locker in it that we filled up with cans of things like pie filling for apple pies and blueberries. And a lot of that stuff actually circumnavigated with us, and we got rid of it when we got back here. We gave it to a charity. One of the things that you want to think about is that there are grocery stores in the Caribbean. You do not have to provision for the entire winter. If you have something special that you need that you think you won't find down there, I would take a fair amount of that with you. But for basic things like peanut butter and cereal and sodas and beer, you might not get your local microbrewery beer down there, but you get pretty decent beer down there. And as I say, the rum is fine any time of year. So you can really have a good time with that. You don't need to provision for the rest of the year. What we do is provision the basics. Paper towels are very expensive in the Caribbean. Toilet paper is in the Caribbean, but it's different than probably what you might like to use. So we provision fairly heavily on that kind of stuff. But when it comes to canned vegetables and things like that, we find that it's actually much more fun to go out and go to the local markets, like the market in Beckwith, where you've got a whole bunch of rosters. And in the morning, they're in pretty good shape, and you can go in there and buy fresh vegetables, all the fresh vegetables that you want. They come over from St. Vincent. They're just picked the day before, so they're fresh. The tomatoes are good. The lettuce is good, or salad as they call it is good. You've got other fruits that you can have down there. You're going to run into stuff that you've never seen before. But to us, that's kind of the fun thing. And we certainly make provisioning a game in the Caribbean. Stores are small unless you're on the big islands. And you may have to go to 5 or 6 different stores to get everything you want. But, you know, you get a chance to talk to everybody. You get a chance to say hello to a bunch of local people, ask them where else you can go to shop. You know, we find that kind of stuff much more fun than trying to provision the boat before you leave here. I can tell you that when you're on the French islands and with the euro at parity with the dollar, you can buy some incredibly good French food in their supermarkets on Guadeloupe, Martinique, Saint Martin, all of the French islands, the Saints. The grocery stores have this really great stuff in them. They've got pate, they've got good French bread that's baked every day. You know, you can have an awful lot of fun with this. We get in the French islands, we never eat breakfast on the boat. It's always off the boat for croissant and coffee. So you might as well enjoy that kind of stuff rather than lock yourself into what you're eating here. Fresh fish is available at many of the markets down there. It's caught the same day. Guys will come around and sell you lobsters, which are fresh. You know, you can do all this kind of stuff down there if you're not locked in to what you eat here in the United States. So start early with the provisioning of paper goods, then add your canned goods, and then the last day or so when you're in Hampton, there'll be a jitney bus down there that we run that will go to a couple of the different supermarkets, and you can pick up all your fresh stuff. Cabbages last a long time, onions last a long time, carrots do pretty well. What doesn't do really, really well is lettuce, and fresh fruit does not last a whole long time. To Bob's point, though, bread tends to get moldy in a hurry. And Julie found that wraps last a long time, so we make most of our sandwiches come out as wraps. Julie did pre-cook 5 or 6 meals so that we had some pre-cooked meals, and we did a lot of fishing on the way. I hope that you'll catch fish on the way. And I'll mention one thing about that. There's a fish that you catch in deep water called a wahoo, and it looks exactly like a barracuda, except that the teeth are different. So if you catch something in the middle of the Gulf Stream that looks like a barracuda, it's not a barracuda, it's a wahoo, and it's one of the best eating fish that you could ever find. And you know, you want to be open to being able to clean fish. I would take fishing gear with me. I would take a good fillet knife with me, and a cutting board so that you can clean the fish, and figure out some way that you can wash the boat down right away. Fillet the fish, don't get too fancy with it. Get rid of the skeleton, goes overboard right away, and put the fillets in the freezer, and you've got a couple of fresh fish meals. Let me see if we've got any questions here. We have had somebody that sold us farm fresh eggs in Hampton, and it didn't work out. We had a couple of rotten eggs. Now, I don't know if the eggs were old when they sold them to us, but you can get them if you look for them. You can get farm fresh eggs, unrefrigerated and unwashed eggs in Hampton, and you can keep those. Eggs are available all through the Caribbean. Chicken is when you get into the Caribbean, you will be tired of hearing chickens cluck and roosters crow. So there are plenty of eggs in the Caribbean. Almost all of the islands have the bigger islands like Antigua's got a couple of very good stores in it. I mentioned the French islands. If you're in the BVI's, there's a couple of good stores there. The US Virgin Islands have basically the same stores that we have here. So you can get, you can get what you want down there.
Let me add to that, Rick. I'm sorry, I thought you were done. Never mind, go ahead.
I would not leave here with 3 dozen eggs, on a rack. I don't think there's any need for it. You can, if you take a dozen with you, if you're going to eat those on the way down, that's great. When you get in, everybody's going to want to get off the boat and go shopping, and you get in a cab and go to a really good grocery store over in Jolly Harbor. A little more expensive, but they've got just about everything that you could possibly want. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rick talked about paper towels, toilet paper. Think of it this way, everything that goes to the islands, and I'll talk about Bahamas in just a moment, everything is shipped in. They don't manufacture stuff there. And if it's light, everything comes in a container, and the container costs the same amount, whether it weighs 40 tons or whether it weighs 1 ton. And it takes, so as a result, the things that are lightweight, like potato chips, feminine hygiene products, toilet paper, paper towels, very expensive. Maybe double the price you're used to paying, and maybe not the quality you're looking for. I would make an addendum, though. I think only one boat here is going to the Bahamas. Food is much harder to come by. There's a couple of good groceries in the Bahamas, but the food is really much more expensive, and fresh fruit is not as easy to get. You have to wait for the mailboat to come in, and everyone scrambles to buy the stuff, because everything pretty much in the Bahamas comes from Miami via one of the big ships. Pretty much everything from Antigua comes from the UK, and in the French islands, you'll see really amazing food. And in terms of alcohol, rum is about half the price there of what it is in the US. And things like gin and so forth are probably a little less expensive. But I would say beer and so forth is a little more expensive. But Rick is right. There's a lot of good stuff available. But I will say, broadly speaking, Antigua, the food is good, but it's not as good as it is in the French island. There's a marked difference between the quality. And just like, for example, if you're in Dominica trying to do grocery shopping, it can be very sparse. But in any island that's French, the food is pretty spectacular. That's where we tend to hang out in the French islands quite a bit as a result of that. And the Bahamas, it's hard to get fresh produce. It's grown locally, but in the Caribbean, I mean, for example, in Antigua, you can buy hothouse bib lettuce. It looks absolutely perfect, and it comes you see it in a basket, and it's just been sliced that's that very day. So you will not go hungry down there. And eating out is somewhat comparable, probably a little less expensive than the US. And people do eat out quite a bit. There's a lot of sort of let's go out to dinner together kind of a thing, and people always are comfortable splitting the check.
So yes, we've got a note up here that you can keep eggs for 4 weeks. You certainly can, and if you want to do that, or if you don't have refrigeration on your boat, that certainly works. You can turn them, and some people used to coat them in Vaseline and turn them, and that was a Lynn Pardee recommendation from their books and their sailing. They sailed in a very basic way until they had the last boat. I guess the first boat that they actually had sweeps on the boat. They didn't have an engine in it, so they certainly didn't have refrigeration. Anything else about provisioning? I think we've kind of covered that pretty quickly, but we can come back to it again if you come up with questions. Let's talk a little bit about spares and repairs. I neglected to last week when we talk about electrical equipment, and if you're going to buy, I would recommend that if you're going to take electrical connectors with you, that you get something like a tool, like a tackle box that's got little compartments in it, And then you can put your red connectors and your blue connectors and your yellow connectors in different, in a different compartment. And you take 25 or 50 of them with you. That's plenty. But one of the two things that I would strongly recommend is that you get a very good, you spend the money and you get a very good crimper to crimp the connections. It's worth the $70 or so from Amazon to get a good ratchet crimper that will really crimp the connector instead of one of those little hand crimpers that makes 1 or 2 spots on it. And I make it a habit of always putting some connective grease. That's a copper grease that you can get. You can also get that through Amazon. And I'm sure there are a lot of other places you can get it. But I put some of that on the wire before I crimp the connector to help keep the moisture out, because that's the thing that you're fighting, is moisture in these connectors. So that's an important thing if you're going to do that. And I also tend to buy the connectors with a shrink tube on them so that I can heat them up, and I've got a little propane torch, or you can just take your stove lighter or your barbecue lighter and shrink the tubing around them. It makes a big difference in how long they last, particularly if you put a new bilge pump or something in the boat and they're down in a wet area. Both of those things will be important to you. Troubleshooting, you're going to need a voltmeter, and you don't have to buy a very expensive one, but you can buy these today with a little clamp on them, a ring clamp on the top, so that you can actually read DC current with them as well. Follow the instructions. You can find out whether you've got current flowing through that connector. You can read AC current with them. Lots of them have AC current, but get one that reads both AC and DC on the ring clamp on the top. And that way it'll be a tremendous help to you to troubleshoot stuff down there. Good voltmeter is desperately important, and get some clamps so that you can hook one on with an alligator clip and you can go probe around with the other one. Most of the problems that you find electronically are bad connections. Let me back up and talk a little bit about getting your boat fixed in the Caribbean when it's beyond your ability. The big islands all have good repair facilities. If you go into St. Martin and you go in through the Dutch side, there's 400 mega yachts there. There are 5 marinas. There are 2 chandleries there that sell everything that you could possibly want. And when you come in, you register your boat and you show them your clearance papers, and it's tax-free. It's import duty free. Some things that you do run into, though, if you're going to try to get your boat fixed in and ship stuff into the BVIs have a whopping big customs duty on everything that comes in. So there, you might, if your boat doesn't, if you can do it, you can go back over to the US Virgin Islands, pick the stuff back up, get rid of the packaging over there, and just bring it in as if it's a spare on your boat. And we've done that with some fairly big stuff. But Nanny Key is a good place in the Virgin Islands, in the British Virgin Islands. I can't remember the name of all of the services in St. Martin, but there are at least 3 places where you can get a boat of almost any size hauled out. And I mean, if you can see them pull out mega yachts there, so they'll pull your boat out. There's a place way down on the coast in Phillipsburg that can pull big boats. They've got good mechanics. And if it's beyond your ability, for instance, changing a high pressure diesel pump, you won't have any problem getting it done there. You certainly can do it there. Martinique and Saint Marin, there's a marina there with 500 or 600 boats in it. You can imagine that every possible marine service is available to you there. And frankly, they're not all that expensive. I think they're very reasonably priced, considering you're in the Caribbean. There's sailmakers in St. Martin. There's sailmakers in Martinique. There's a quantum sailmaker at Nanny Key in the British Virgin Islands. You've got Doyle and North, and most of the big sail makers are down in there, down in the Caribbean. If you find yourself going south of Martinique, St. Lucia's got decent repair facilities again at Jolly Harbor. I'm sorry, it's not Jolly Harbor. What's the name of the harbor there, Bob?
I was afraid you were going to ask me, but it'll come to me in a minute.
Okay, but at any rate, you can get stuff fixed on St. Lucia very easily. They've got a very good chandlery on St. Lucia, so you'll have no problems there. When you get further south, you get down into Grenada, you're back into good boat repair facilities. And if you go down into Trinidad, if you want to leave your boat over the winter, over the summer. Oh, Rodney Bay, somebody put up.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's just word hunting. Down in both Grenada and Antigua, you can get your boat painted, you can get teak replaced, you can get people to varnish your teak. There's nothing that they can't do for you down there. They've got very, very good ability to make parts for you, make custom-made parts. You can get a new bimini made. You can get like I say, anything you want, new anchor rollers. All of these places sell windlasses. You can buy a new dinghy. You can get your outboard fixed. You really shouldn't have. This isn't 30 years ago where there was nothing down there. Today,
there are people.
And all these places have charter companies in them. So there's a lot of people around that work on boats. Bob, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, another thing to keep in mind is that you will be with other Salty Dog people that have been there for many, many years, and they will give you the name and phone number or WhatsApp number for people that will come out to your boat on a moment's notice. And chances are also some of the problems you have, there'll be someone in the fleet that'll just say, hey, listen, I'll come over for, we'll have a rum and Coke afterwards, and I'll fix it for you. There's pretty much everything is available. Rick has talked about the BVI and the USVI, and keep in mind that the rally home leaves from that area in the spring. And so what we generally recommend is we start in Antigua, work your way south, and then on the way back, stop in the Virgins and maybe even jump up through the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas on the way home. Everything's downwind pretty much from Antigua, which is great. It's a little tricky though, Don, in the Bahamas of getting broken stuff fixed. That's a little trickier, but there are ways to deal with that. We can talk about that also. Any questions on spares and repairs?
Yeah, Don, I'm sorry. We've always a lot of times come home through the Bahamas, and usually by that time I've got the boat under pretty good, everything's in pretty good shape, and it's usually a pretty easy trip up. We don't tend to break things coming up through there, and in many instances we're already heading back to the United States. I would probably come across to the United States if I had a big problem and get it fixed in Florida, rather than trying to get it fixed by somebody who's marginal in the Bahamas. The Abacos has got good service in them. And there is Emerald Bay Marina in Georgetown that I understand has got reasonably decent services. And I believe, I'm looking at John shaking his head, no. Okay, I'm not that familiar with that.
So basically, I think we've covered it pretty well. If this has spawned additional questions, as you can see, Rick has a deep understanding of mechanical stuff. And, think about the kinds of things that you can fix. Like I always keep a spare water pump. I keep a spare alternator for the engine. It's easy to replace. Lots of belts. I burn through a set of belts pretty much every winter because of the number of hours I put on the engine, and I have quite a large alternator. So think about the kinds of things that you would be miserable if you had to go without it for a week on the way down. We had someone with a raw water pump that failed a few years ago, and he couldn't run his engine, and he basically floated around for a week. It was very frustrating. So I keep a spare water pump on the boat too. You can't have everything, but you can certainly think about the things that are easy to repair and have those on board. So feel free to reach out to us for other things. Maybe, Rick, we should move on to charts.
Yeah, let me just say one thing and then we'll move on to charts. In St. Martin, I've gone into a Volvo dealer in St. Martin and bought the parts to replace all of the bushings and bearings in my roll water pumps on my catamaran. So all of that stuff is available there. And then I'll let Bob go ahead with the charts. He's much more familiar with them currently than I am.
Okay, I was just mentioning to Don early, there's in the Bahamas or in the Caribbean, there's a whole variety of options, but in the Bahamas, there's only one really decent option, and that's the Explorer charts. And then within that, there's an electronic version available from Aquamap. That's the one you should buy. You can license that. What I do aboard, and then I'll get into the specifics about why I have various chart options, is I use an iPad as a secondary navigation device. I have my plotter. I have a Raymarine plotter. It's an older plotter. It's not as neat as some of the newer ones, but it works. And I carry a spare plotter actually, because I have just in case. The iPad, we have two iPads. Both of them carry various chart options. I subscribe to Navionics. That's a good mix. And I download basically the whole region. It's not expensive. It's an annual subscription. I think it's less than $100. And then I also have NV, NV charts out of Germany. I mentioned last week. They are available to run a PC or on an iPad or a tablet, but not on a plotter. They are, I think, the best charts for the Caribbean. They're available as a downloadable product as well. And you get a discount on Aquamaps, and maybe we'll get a discount on NV. That kind of comes and goes year to year. So what I do is I just, when I'm coming into a harbor, I'll have my plotter running, and then I make sure that before I leave, I download the most current notice to mariners or whatever current charts there are on all three of the programs. And there are differences. You will, in the Bahamas, the differences are enormous. But in some cases, like when we went to Cuba, the only charts that I trusted were the NV charts, and sometimes the buoys were off by as much as a half a mile because nobody had updated them in such a long time. So to me, the matter of having spares, that's just so important to consider, making sure that you know where you are at any given point. And one of the nice things about the NV charts, as is also the case with the charts for the Bahamas, is they have waypoints off of a harbor, so you can put in the lat long as an actual coordinate in your plotter and make sure that it matches. And to that point, one of the things you're going to run into with Chris Parker is he's going to give you a kind of a blur of coordinates. He'll say, reach, there's going to be a trough that'll be running from 60 degrees west and whatever north, and draw a line. And so you want to be able to put in individual waypoints as a way to kind of visualize what he's talking about. If you use predict wind, it gets a whole lot easier to do that. But basically, the key is to have more than one source of information, whether it be weather or charts or whatever. And you never know if something's going to get fried, if it's going to stop working. So I generally keep paper charts for everything. And if you're going to the Caribbean, it's still a good idea to have charts for the Turks and Caicos and for the Bahamas, because you never know, you might have to bail on the way north, and you do not want to go into the Bahamas without good charts. There are no buoys at all. And going through a cut, even if you can see what you're doing, would be very unadvisable without good charts. Rick, you want to add anything to all that? You're still muted, Rick.
Over the years, we've had a couple of boats that needed to bail out on the way down, and the Bahamas turned out to be the best bailout situation for them. So you really need to have charts for the Bahamas. And I would frankly take charts for Bermuda as well, because if you need to go there, you're going to need charts to get in. Bermuda is a tough place. The fringing reef around Bermuda lays in a direction that I always have a hard time rationalizing. And you certainly don't want to cut the corner on it, because you'll end up like a whole lot of other boats that have tried to cut the corner on Bermuda. You really have to come all the way around the island to get into the cut, to come into Bermuda. So have paper charts with you. You may never use them. The rocks don't move. The buoys do sometimes, but you know, you can kind of figure that out. You can kind of rationalize that as you come in, particularly if you go slowly. Certainly for the Turks and Caicos are kind of fun to come through on the way home. You don't need anything for Cuba. There's a pretty nice channel that runs up on the south side of the Bahamas called the Old Bahama Channel, and you come up that. It's deep, and it's an easy way to get back. You know, it's an easy way to come home. So I would certainly, we always carried both paper charts and electronic charts. And I agree with Bob, the NV charts are far and away the best for the Caribbean. We're staying on time here pretty well. I'll say a couple of things. Let's talk about a timeline for departure. You know, you want to think about this, and I can tell you that people will show up in Hampton and start installing equipment in Hampton. That's not the time you want to do that. You have no way of testing it. You have no way of figuring out whether the autopilot is working. You find yourself, you know, leaving the dock to go out and calibrate the autopilot. And you've got a problem. You got to come back in. And Hampton is a very yacht-friendly community, but there's a lack of technicians there that will show up on time. So if you're going to install anything on your boat, I would do it between now and the time that you head south to Hampton, or now and the time that you head over. I guess everybody here is leaving from Hampton. So put it on, check it out, make sure that it works, make sure that you've got the manuals for it, make sure that you've got the spares. Download the manuals. You don't need to take paper manuals with you anymore. Download the manuals onto a jump drive, and you carry that little stick around with you, and you can put it in your computer, and you've got all of the manuals that you could possibly use. But I would also take manuals for the engine that you've got, and not just a little manual that tells you how to change the oil. But I keep on my computer, I kept the shop manual for the Volvo engines on the catamaran, and for my Yanmar on Altair, which was a Saga 48. And you go in and you need to get a part for it. You can go in with the right part number. And that makes a world of difference when you walk into a place. If you put a part number down in front of the guy, he can tell you whether he's got it right away or not. So do that kind of stuff. And the other thing that I would strongly suggest is that you take your boat out and you sail it, reef it, sail it in a little tougher weather, reef it, figure out what kind of systems you're going to use, and plan now. You've got a couple of months before you need to show up in Hampton, but make sure you're sailing your boat and not just working on it. And I'll open it up to questions at this point. That's what we said we would do, give 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. Have we got any? Silence. Oh, go ahead, Don. Unmute yourself, Don.
I'm trying.
Okay.
You said NV charts as in November Victor?
Yes.
No, you're not. For the Bahamas, you're going to go with the Explorer charts.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to add one other thing to what Rick just talked about using your boat. There's always anxiety about fuel, no matter what. I certainly worry about it because I don't like flopping around. So what I recommend you do is I keep a log every time I turn the engine on, how many miles I've gone, how many hours the engine is run, and I put down the hours on the hour meter at the beginning and the end of every day. And I keep track of that. And then when it comes time to fill the fuel, I then go back and I figure out what my average consumption is. And I tend to run the engine at a similar RPM all the time. This way, I mean, not always, but most of the time when I'm cruising, I pick a certain RPM that gives me good speed. And also, so I know what my fuel consumption is. And I can usually estimate within an hour or so when I'm going to run out of fuel on a given fuel tank. And you might want to consider, but you don't want to do this too close to shore, but make sure you know how to bleed your engine, and maybe run your fuel right down to nothing. Wait till it just stumbles, and shut the engine off and switch tanks, so that you will know that your 50-gallon tank actually only has 40 gallons of usable fuel. And to that point, my boat is sort of a semi-custom boat. They only built 3 of them. And the information from the designer says I have 3 50-gallon tanks. One of the tanks is 43 gallons. The other tank's like 35. That's just what they are. And for many years, I actually thought I had 150 gallons of fuel when I had like 110. So I've added capacity, but you just won't worry so much if you really understand it. Best to do it when you're close to shore, and do practice bleeding your engine, because if you run the tank dry by accident, it isn't always, you just can't turn the fuel on, and you have to go through a bleeding process. It's very straightforward, but you don't want to do it the first time in 6-foot seas.
So let's stay on the fuel subject for a little bit. There was certainly a time in the Caribbean and a time in the Bahamas where you wouldn't put fuel on board without a fuel filter. And the days of that have really passed. If you go into Nanny Key or you go into the marina at La Marin and try to use a Baja filter and slow the fueling process down, you're gonna be asked to stop doing that. These guys sell thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel these days. You've got sport fishing boats that operate out of there. You've got mega yachts that operate out of St. Martin. No one is going to be happy to have you show up with a Baja filter and put 5 gallons a minute or 10 gallons a minute into your tank. I fortunately have never had a problem with the fuel in the Caribbean. And I've gotten fuel in the Bahamas every year that we've come back through the Bahamas, and I've never had a problem getting, for instance, on Long Island or in Georgetown or up in Nassau or up in the Abacos. I've never had a problem with the fuel I buy up there. You look around in the marina, and if the marina is populated with sport fishermen that are buying 1,000 gallons at a time to go out and fish for marlin and tuna and sailfish out there, you can bet that the fuel is pretty decent. If you go to Rum Key and there are 3 boats in there, that might be a place I'd skip getting fuel. But most of the other places are good for fuel. In Bequia, there's a barge that comes out with fuel for you. And that fuel I've always found to be very clean. A guy comes out in a barge and he's got a couple of 100-gallon, I guess it's probably a 500-gallon tank on the boat that you can see the fuel inside. You can get an idea of the volume of the fuel in there, and you buy fuel from them right there on the mooring. You don't have to go into a dock or anything else. So that works out pretty well. And fuel has not been a problem. Getting fresh water is more of a problem. That's clean, more of a problem than getting clean fuel, I think, in the Caribbean. And I've found the same in the Bahamas, Don.
The only time I've ever gotten crummy fuel was in Beaufort, North Carolina, and I bought it in the wintertime before I headed out in January, and I ended up with a gallon of it in one of my tanks. So, but Rick is correct. It's always a good idea, given the fact that it's hot down there, and you probably won't be using much fuel once you get there, to make sure you put an antifungal in your tank when you fill it up.
Yeah, BioBore is good. There's a bunch of them. You can check around. There's a blue one which I use, which is star something or other, and that seems to do a good job. But put it in. It's worth doing, because once you get and I've had a very bad fungal or bacteria infection in a diesel tank, and it takes forever to get it out. You end up leaving a whole lot of fuel behind someplace where you have your fuel polished. So it's just, think about that. And again, bring plenty of fuel filters with you.
And if your boat has been sitting for a number of years and hasn't been used in rough conditions, it might be worth having your fuel polished. It costs a couple $100. And when you're 500 miles from shore and your engine is choking and you're running out of fuel filters, you'll wish you'd done it.
Do it.
Now, are there any other questions before we talk about our next meeting?
Can you guys see the chat on the side?
I think we covered it pretty much. There's only.
I was just going to say that somebody mentioned that Bradford Marine in Freeport is an excellent. Oh, there you go, John. You put it up. Bradford Marine is an excellent place to get work done. I just want to make sure you guys had that information.
Yeah.
Done.
So we talked about doing a couple of more of these. If you find that useful, would you like to do that? I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm happy to do it. I know Rick is. Yeah. Let's take a break for a week, and let's reconvene sort of same time, same place on I can't believe it, August 8th. I mean, who would have guessed? And we'll send out that information. In the meantime, do not hesitate to reach out to Rick at saltydogsailing.org, or me, Bob, at saltydogsailing.org. I personally am having some issues with my cell phone. And I think at a future date, we'll talk about connectivity in the islands and in the Bahamas, because that's a whole nother can of worms. Everybody's so focused on keeping up with FaceTime and so forth with their family. It works quite well. I can tell you things have changed tremendously over the last few years. So stay tuned, and we'll kind of keep moving as we go along, and we'll be sending out an invite. And so, everyone have a good week. And thank you, Rick, for being a part of this. And thanks to everybody for being with us this evening. So I think in the spirit of things, I'm going to go have a rum punch.
Have a good evening, all.
Thank you. Time for a painkiller.
Thank you for the information. Appreciate it.
Sure.
1 week or 2 weeks from now?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
The 8th of August. We're going to skip a week. Yeah.
Wonderful. Cool. Well,
and anybody who signs up between now and then that's eligible for this, we'll be inviting them as well. So they'll probably have some new faces. Everyone have a great day.
Take care.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.